Is music a part of your life? If it isn't, watch this video and let me explain why it should be. My name is Josh Gu, and after years of studying the clarinet with some of the best teachers from around the world, I am excited to be sharing my knowledge with you. So go to QuickStartClarinet.com or check the description on this video to see all of the wonderful resources I have to help you reach your clarinet dreams. And of course, subscribe to this channel for weekly clarinet and music tips and tricks. So before we get into this too much, I actually want to start with a little disclaimer that I'm not the best filmmaker or video editor, so this isn't going to be the most visually engaging video. It might honestly work better as a podcast, but I do really encourage you to pay attention to this. Try not to be too distracted. Don't just play this in the background, and actually engage with the ideas that I'm sharing here, especially if you don't do music, but even if you're a musician already and you want to see all of the value that there is to it. I do really think that the world would be a better place if everybody did music. So let me get into why, and I hope that you're able to keep your attention and enjoy this video. So what is musicking and why is it so important? First of all, the term musicking was coined by Christopher Small in his book by the same title, and it's a really interesting idea where we take music from a noun as a sort of thing and turn it into a verb of to music or musicking. And I think this is a really important idea because it does shift sort of the role of music and musicking in our lives. To very simply give a definition of it, and again, you could read the whole book to get a more thorough, in-depth explanation of what musicking actually is, but the very simple definition is that it's just the process of engaging with music, whether that be actually practicing music and learning an instrument and learning the music and practicing performing it, but even things just like listening to music and in an engaged way listening, or dancing to music, or creating music, whether you're just sort of tapping your foot or tapping on a desk or something, that counts as creating music, or more formal, actual like pen and paper composing, of course, is also creating music. But all of those things are encompassed in musicking, and I think that's the thing that we really should all be engaging in. I don't think everybody in the world needs to learn to play the clarinet, although if you do, that would be cool if everybody in the world learned to play the clarinet. But I think we all should be engaging in musicking in some form or another. And before I go too in-depth with why we should all music, I want to give the disclaimer that musicking is not just passively listening to music. If you have music on in the background while you're studying, or if you hear background music at the store, things like that where it's just background noise, that's not musicking. Although you could be musicking in the store if you're really engaged and listening to the background music. It's when it comes to the foreground and is something that you're actually putting your attention and thought and concentration into, that's when it becomes musicking. And of course, whenever you're playing, you're naturally going to have that more concentration. Although I suspect you could play an instrument very just going through the motions, not thinking about it, not engaging with it, and not truly be musicking. So it's a little bit of a gray area where it shifts from just passive background stuff to actually engaged and active musicking, which is the stuff that I do think can change the world. So why should everybody music, and what do we get out of it? So the first thing is kind of some boring stuff that you hear all of the time. The argument that music should be taught in schools because it gives better math scores is the worst argument there is for music. I don't think that we should treat music as valuable because it makes us better at something else that is actually valuable. That's a really bad way of looking at it, in a really boring way. Though it is true and is a benefit of learning music and doing music. A couple other of the sort of boring things is that it increases coordination, which is true and good and valuable, but again, it's looking at music as valuable because it makes you better at something else. The other ones of like teamwork and discipline are also really good, sort of generic, like Yes, it does help with that, but that's not as exciting as some of the other stuff and other value that music can bring to our lives and actually to ourselves, rather than just developing a different skill that we deem more valuable. So that's a first really important point, that we shouldn't value music just because it makes us better at other things. So now I actually want to go through some examples of musicking and pair them with really important values and skills that you can get out of the actual act of musicking itself. So the first one is, maybe you're listening to a piece. It could be an orchestra concert, it could be a new pop song, whatever it is. As you're listening to it, you're engaging with it, you're hearing the music, you're listening, but there's never really an end goal to that. You never win. It's not like a test where you study, and then you pass your test. It's not like working where you work, and then you get to retire, or you work all day and then you get done with the day and get to go home. And yes, sometimes the end of a piece is very exciting and engaging, but there's not really any like winning moment in music. There's nothing that you're aiming for. There's no real goal to it. It's much more process oriented. And I think that's one of the first big values that you get from doing music, is that it's all about the process. There's no winning, there's no losing. It's just you're existing, you're doing, you're being in the moment with the music. And that's a really powerful thing that I think we could all use more of, is just being with the moment with no ulterior motives or no goals. The same thing applies to practicing as well. Yes, there are little wins here and there where it's like, oh, I couldn't play this last week, but I practiced it and I got it, and that feels really good. But even once you get it, you could always get it better. And even once you can tongue 16th notes at 120, you could always shoot for 144. And there's this never-ending sort of depth to better sound, better rhythmic accuracy, better finger technique when you're actually practicing. So it's that same kind of process-oriented space, and practicing becomes so much more satisfying when you're just there in the process rather than just trying to get this so that you can reach a specific goal. So learning to be process-oriented is one of the first big benefits of music. Another big benefit along those same lines is that you learn to overcome failure and you learn how to do hard things. Even for me, almost every time that I look at a new piece of music, I look at it and I'm like, oh man, this looks like really challenging, it's going to be tricky. And also almost every time, the first time I play a piece of music, it doesn't sound very good, and it could be considered a failure, where you start off, it's tricky, it doesn't work, but then you learn to practice, you actually learn it, you work on it, and then you overcome that difficulty and overcome that hard thing, and learned to go from sounding bad to sounding good and put in the work to make that success. Let's look at another example of musicking that really imparts truly valuable skills, and that would be playing something. And this is sort of the distinction between beginner players and more advanced players. So a beginner player will play something and it'll be okay, and they might think that it was pretty good. Whereas an advanced player, hearing the beginner player play that, can hear all kinds of opportunities for improvement and different things that could be adjusted and made better. Same thing for the advanced player. When they may play at objectively a much higher level than the beginner player, but they're still hearing all of these little things that could be improved, and all of these things that need to be better. This can also be applied to just listening to music and engaging that way, where you can engage sort of critically with any music that you're listening to, where you're kind of judging if this is music that you like better or you like less. Notice I didn't say music that is actually better or actually worse, because that's very, very subjective, but you can be always discerning and deciding for your own personal tastes if this is something you like more. And you can get that very refined depending on your sort of skill of listening to music. Maybe sometimes you listen to a piece and you're like, oh, I like the lyrics to this, so like, this is a piece that I like. Sometimes you can be listening to a piece or a song and think, oh, I really love the like harmonic transition here. I love when this specific instrument or timbre comes in and takes over this melody. Things like that can get, of course, more advanced, but it's that same idea that there's this level of listening and discerning quality. That's a very, very important skill to have. And in music, we learn it as sort of good listening skills and being able to know what's good and what's not good. And that can be applied to other areas of life, of course, and sort of critical thinking and also self-assessment and self-awareness, especially if you're learning an instrument and actually playing and you're listening very carefully to how you sound. You're thinking, how does that actually sound like? What am I sounding like currently? And then you have that awareness of what you do want to sound like because you've thought about it before and you've taken many different sounds that you've heard and quality of playing of whatever your instrument is, and you know what you want. So you've done the critical thinking to hone in on what you actually want, and you're doing the critical listening and that really disciplined discerning of your quality of playing so that you can gradually move towards, in that process, towards the goal that you want. And this sort of critical thinking of what is actually good and what you actually want, and this close listening and discerning quality of yourself is a very, very important skill in today's world, to be able to sort of find the information and really be discerning the quality of information when there's so much information in the world. And I know I said earlier that we shouldn't just value music because of the skills that it teaches us to be better at other things, but this is one of the skills that listening and discerning quality is so valuable and so beneficial in so many areas of life, not just to get a better math score on a test or things like that. All right, this next one's a fun one. When was the last time, or who has ever listened to an entire hour-long Mahler symphony without falling asleep or without checking your phone or doing other things or being distracted in some other way? I don't think that I can say that I've ever done that, because it's a challenge, and what it's challenging is your concentration and your focus. And again, that's very valuable to be able to concentrate. At the beginning of this video, I asked you to concentrate and pay attention to this video, and how well are you doing that so far? That's another good test. And the thing is, if you can really listen to an hour-long symphony and stay engaged with it, that's nearly as good as meditating in terms of training your focus and getting really locked in. This is 100% true as well of actually performing music too. You have to stay concentrated and engaged, so that you don't lose where you are in the music and that you're always really on top of it. In fact, probably the only time I've ever stayed concentrated throughout an entire Mahler symphony was if I was actually the one playing it, which probably speaks to my music listening skills more than anything, but it's a really important skill to develop and to have. This can also be applied to popular music, not just sitting through a symphony for an hour. Maybe things like rap and hip hop, like how much can you like concentrate and actually hear every single word that's happening? That's a more concentrated, deep concentration for a short amount of time, but is equally valuable sort of concentration and focus that you can develop through musicking. Earlier I mentioned that teamwork is sort of one of those boring skills that we always say music gives us, but I do think there is some true value to that, but I want to shift it a little bit from just teamwork to more specifically collaboration, because I think that's a healthier way of thinking of it. When you're making music, you're very much in step and in tune with the people that you're making the music with. You have to be very carefully listening to what they're doing, taking what they're giving, putting your input and having it all marry together into something that's very nice. I might argue that music teaches better teamwork and collaboration than even sports. I think oftentimes in sports, yes, there is teamwork to it, and you can't do it all by yourself, but a lot of times in sports, it's sort of when you have the ball, you're doing your individual thing. When you don't have the ball, you're trying to help and encourage and get your teammates in a position to do better. You're sort of supporting the teammates or whoever has the ball. But really, it is still a bit of an individual thing where when you have the ball, you have to do your thing. And music is a bit similar to that. You could say, like, when you have a solo in the piece is very similar. But 99% of the time, you don't have a solo and you're in constant collaboration of supporting where you need to and contributing. And if you stop contributing, it can completely fall apart. Whereas in a sport, if you stop contributing, yes, you do worse for sure, but you can still be carried by other people on your team. Whereas in music, there's not really any carrying potential because it's everybody collaborating to create something meaningful. And when one part falls away, then the whole thing loses its effectiveness and its beauty. And last but not least, potentially the most important and impactful thing that we get from musicking is culture and empathy. We really learn our own culture through music. Music is such a major part of all cultures. We can engage with and learn other people's culture through musicking, just through listening to their music, and even more so through performing their music. So there's so much value there for culture and respecting other cultures and engaging with other cultures, and I think that's very powerful. Also, this idea of empathy is super important too. When you're performing a piece of music and it's a sort of classical composition, or thinking of it as it's written down on the paper, you're actually having to be very empathetic with the composer. You have to ask yourself, when the composer wrote this rhythm or this dynamic marking, like, what were they actually going for? And you're sort of getting in the head of the composer and you're bringing it to life. Same thing from the composition side. As a composer, you're not really creating the music. You're creating instructions for something that you hear in your head, but it's up to performers to bring those instructions to life and actually turn the instructions into actual music that we can hear. So that's a very empathetic process of, again, working together, but even more so trying to get into each other's heads. The composer is writing like, oh, if I write this marking, will this make the performer do what I want? And the performer is thinking, okay, the composer wrote this marking, so like, what is it that they actually wanted there? And that's a very deeply empathetic process. And this is also true if you're playing on another culture's music too, where you can get empathy for another culture through getting into sort of the minds of those composers and those creators of music as you do the work to bring it to life as a performer. And that was very much a classical composer-performer kind of example, but this absolutely applies to even just listening to popular music as well. You're hearing the emotions and the sort of soul that the artist put into that, and that's why music can have such a big impact on us, where we feel like we're being related to by whatever artist that has made that certain piece. We can relate to the themes of it, we can relate to the emotions that the music is expressing, and we get that empathetic connection of sort of seeing the artist's soul and hearing the artist's soul and experiencing it for ourselves and sharing that connection of relatability or even unrelatability sometimes too, but having that empathy where you might hear this very painfully sad song and maybe you've never experienced that kind of sorrow in your life yet, and maybe hopefully never, but you can see that somebody else has experienced that deep level of sorrow and you can connect with that, and that grows your empathy for experiencing that in others in the world. So that's a bunch of the value that I see in music and musicking myself and in others. And again, I don't want to say like musicking is valuable just because it gives us these other skills and values that we can apply to other places in the world. But I do want to give some concrete examples of how I think musicking can actually change the world. I mentioned that at the beginning, and I want to dive into that a little bit here at the end. So first of all, I want to sort of identify the problems of the world. I could be here all day listing specific problems of the world, but I think it comes down to really three important things. One is general selfishness and sort of putting ourselves first over others. The second one is miseducation. I started off by just calling this dumb, and then I changed it to uneducated, but I think the most accurate term for this is just miseducated. And then last is sort of distracted. I think those are the qualities of people that make the world a less good place. And finally, this is a little bit separate from individuals' qualities, but it's sort of a systematic quality that we have, and that is that we value money and capital over people. And I think that's really kind of money is the root of all evil, right? That's the idea there. But I think it is a very true systematic problem in really the global society. So let me explain a little bit how I believe that thoughtfully musicking can fix those problems. So the first one is general selfishness, and this comes down to not being able to relate to others and see sort of the struggles of others, and it's really tied into that idea of empathy. And I think if you can know from the musicking side of things, say that you're really good and have a good understanding of how the music of jazz was sort of developed from the blues, which was then developed from African slave music, and that sort of history of that. And I think that gives you such empathy to see, like, how could anybody ever think of the people that we enslaved as lesser when they've created such beautiful culture and music and have that lineage of music and empathy by understanding that different culture and that different music. So that's one example of the empathy and having less selfishness and less thinking that you're better than anybody else, because we've all contributed in different ways and built our own culture. And it's in every culture, every type of people, every individual has the power to contribute in their own way and their own sort of views of musicking and culture and engagement with that. Same thing goes for wars. How could you ever attack another country when they have such beautiful music and have created such culture there too? When you're engaged with another communities or countries' culture in their music, then it makes it so much easier to empathize with them, understand where they're coming from, and think of us all as one. We're not us and them. We're all doing the same thing. We all have our own cultures and our own music. And when you're engaged with that and you have that understanding of how these things have developed, it gives you so much more empathy and hopefully less selfishness. For being miseducated, there's so much information in the world. It's so easy to get latched on to the wrong information and think of it as the truth. But when you music, you have to look at every new sound that you hear, every new piece or song that you listen to, and you get to sort of judge it and decide if you like it or not, and you get that sort of discerning listening that we talked about earlier. Same thing for finding your sound. If you play an instrument, you get to hear all of these different sounds and you get to sort of hone in on what sounds good to you and go for the process of finding that. And that's the other beauty of music. Even just listening to popular music, you're always looking for that more nuance of exactly what you like to listen to out of all of the options there are. And if we treated information like that, always trying to find more nuanced information, more accurate information, better information that seems more reliable, that would go a long way in helping us to be more educated and more informed in the world as a whole. And distraction plays a big role in that miseducation and just not paying attention to the things that are actually going on. And again, I sort of use that example of listening to the whole hour-long Mahler symphony. If you have the concentration and the focus to do that, then you can really hone in on the information that's accurate and really be aware of the things that are going on. Same thing for self-awareness of that listening and discerning quality. If you have self-awareness for what you're like and what you're contributing to the world, then that's a great way to not be distracted and be deliberate, which would be the opposite of distracted, for what you're actually bringing to the world. I also had that disclaimer at the beginning of this video where I really encourage you to pay attention to this, even though it's not the most flashy and exciting and visually engaging. Hopefully it's a little bit mentally engaging and you've been enjoying the things that I've been saying, or thinking at least about the things that I've been saying. But how engaged and concentrated and not distracted were you while listening to this video? And I think that's an important skill to consider if you have, and musicking can help you be less distracted, especially if you're very thoughtfully engaging with the music and not just having it on in the background. And last but not least is the issue of money being the root of all evil. And I think music combats this so effectively because, again, there's no sense of winning. When you perform music or you engage in music, you're not doing it to one-up somebody else, hopefully. You certainly can sort of not get the best point out of music and just treat it as truly competitive, which is not at all the point of musicking. But if you're truly doing it correctly, you're coming together with a group of people, you're creating something, and you're sharing that creation with another group of people. And that's a really beautiful thing that is kind of the antithesis to money and capitalism, where the goal is to take as much money in as you can from wherever you can get it and sort of hoard it and never share it with anybody. The goal is to amass as much capital as you possibly can, and that's winning, and you've done it, and you're richer than somebody else, and you win. Music is not that at all. Music, you can amass your skills, and you can learn from other people, and you can become a better player or a better musician or even a better listener, and then you can engage with other people and you can share that. As from the listener's perspective of things, the more you are discerning in your listening, the more that you can listen to any piece of music, whether classical symphony or a pop song, whatever it may be, and you can get value out of that. You can get the emotional experiences out of that, and you can connect deeper and deeper with whatever the artist is or the performing musicians or whoever it may be that are creating that music. And we're always sharing it in a communal sort of way, not in a selfish, hoard it for yourself kind of way. So hopefully you're convinced that everybody should be musicking in some way or another. And again, it doesn't have to be learning the classical clarinet, as much as I would love for you to do that, and as many of you watching may do that because that's what my channel is about. But there's so much more. As long as you're thoughtfully engaging, whether it's listening to the radio and actually listening to it and thinking about that music and engaging with it rather than just having it on while you're driving, that all counts as musicking. So I really encourage everybody to go out there and music and absorb these skills and engage thoughtfully with the music. I also have some music resources if you would be interested in learning more about that. You can check out my playlist for music literacy that you should know by age 8. Even if you're older than age 8, this is still really valuable. This is a great place for true beginners if you've never engaged with music at all. This sort of teaches you how to get the basics of reading traditionally written music. I don't have any good resources for improving your listening to music. Maybe that's something I'll create in the future. And of course, if you're a clarinetist and you want to go deeper and engage more with the musicking of playing the clarinet, then you should check out in the description the Next Generation Clarinet method. You could also go to quickstartclarinet.com/nextgenbook to learn more about that. That's a great resource for learning more about clarinet and getting better at playing the clarinet. And last but not least, this was a very deep topic that I think could have much more discussion than just the duration of this one video. So do feel free and please comment with any other values that you think music brings to the world, any other reasons that you think people should be musicking, anything that I said that you disagree with, or any more nuance that can be added to what I said. I think it's really important that we're always striving for more nuance, more accuracy, more engagement, and more thoughtfulness as we try to live in a more empathetic and loving world. So thanks so much for watching. Go on and music, and I look forward to seeing you in another video.